Hi, I'm Emma Rodriguez. 4 years ago, my sister Jessica called me a worthless dreamer who'd never amount to anything and told me I wasn't welcome at family events anymore. Last Saturday, at her baby shower, she introduced me to her husband's coworkers as the family failure who wastes her life on computers. What she didn't know was that her husband Michael works for me, and when she finished her cruel introduction, he leaned over and whispered in shock, "Jessica, that's my CEO." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins in Millbrook, Ohio, where I learned early that being different meant being wrong. While my older sister Jessica was crowned homecoming princess and dated the captain of the football team, I spent my Friday nights in my bedroom teaching myself how to code. When other girls my age were at sleepovers doing each other's makeup, I was building my first website for our neighbor's small bakery. I charged them $50 and felt like I'd conquered the world. My parents, Patricia and Robert Rodriguez, were good people who worked hard their entire lives. Dad spent 30 years at the same manufacturing plant, and Mom managed the evening shift at Target while raising 2 daughters. They believed in stability, in taking the safe path, in following rules that had worked for their generation. They looked at Jessica with pride because she represented everything they understood about success. She was pretty, popular, and planning to marry her high school sweetheart right after graduation. I represented everything they feared about the future, change, technology they couldn't comprehend, and dreams that seemed too big for a girl from our small town. The divide between Jessica and me wasn't just about age or interests. It was fundamental. She thrived in the social world our parents admired, where success meant fitting in perfectly and following a predetermined script. I was drawn to creating something that had never existed before, to solving problems in ways that hadn't been tried yet. When Jessica brought home perfect report cards, our parents celebrated with dinner at Applebee's. When I built my first mobile app at 16, they asked me when I was going to focus on real subjects instead of playing around on the computer all the time. During my junior year of high school, I started a small online business creating custom websites for local shops. Word spread through our tiny downtown area, and soon I was making more money in a weekend than my classmates made working part-time at the grocery store. I saved every penny, not for a car or clothes like other teenagers, but because I had a vision that felt bigger than Millbrook. I wanted to study computer science at Ohio State, then maybe move to a city where technology companies were changing the world. I spent hours researching scholarship opportunities and reading about entrepreneurs who had started with nothing but an idea and determination. My business teacher, Ms. Chen, was the only adult who seemed to understand what I was trying to build. She would stay after school to help me create business plans and practice presentations. During one memorable conversation, she told me something I've never forgotten. "Emma," she said, "the people who change the world are always misunderstood at first. The question isn't whether others believe in your vision. The question is whether you believe in it enough to keep going when they don't." She gave me her business card that day, and I kept it taped to my bedroom mirror throughout high school as a reminder that at least one person saw potential in my dreams. While I was building websites and learning programming languages, Jessica was planning her perfect traditional life. She got engaged to Michael Thompson during their sophomore year of college, a nice guy studying business who promised her the kind of stable, predictable future our parents had always wanted for both their daughters. Michael was everything they approved of: polite, hardworking, and content to follow conventional paths to conventional success. He landed a good job at a software company after graduation, providing the security Jessica craved and the validation our parents needed that their older daughter had made all the right choices. The tension in our house grew thicker as my senior year progressed. Every conversation about my future became an argument about practicality versus foolishness. Dad would shake his head when I talked about starting my own company someday, muttering, about kids who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Mom would sigh and suggest I consider nursing or teaching, careers she could explain to her friends and understand herself. Jessica enjoyed these moments of family alignment against my unrealistic ambitions. She would smirk and add comments about how I needed to come back down to earth and stop thinking I'm special. During my senior year, I applied to Ohio State's computer science program and several others, but I also applied to the entrepreneurship program at Millbrook Community College. It wasn't prestigious, but they offered a pathway to start a business while taking classes, and the cost was low enough that I could pay for it myself with my website earnings. When I told my family about this plan, the reaction was swift and harsh. Dad called it throwing your life away on a fantasy, and Mom worried aloud about what people would think when they found out I was choosing community college over a real university. Jessica laughed outright and said I was just making excuses for not being smart enough for Ohio State. The breaking point came in March of my senior year. I had been working on a scheduling app for small businesses, something I'd noticed was needed when I talked to my website clients. I spent 3 months developing it, testing it, and preparing to launch it as my first real product. I was proud of the work and excited about the potential. The app solved a genuine problem, and early feedback from local business owners was positive. I thought maybe, finally, my family would see that my passion for technology could actually lead somewhere meaningful. I chose to share the news during a Sunday dinner, when the whole family was together and relaxed. I explained how the app worked, showed them the user interface on my laptop, and told them about the small businesses that were already interested in buying it. I expected questions, maybe even skepticism, but I hoped for a glimmer of support, or at least curiosity about what I had created. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Instead, the silence that followed was deafening. Dad looked at my laptop screen like it was written in a foreign language. Mom asked if this meant I was going to waste more time on computer stuff instead of focusing on getting into college. Jessica rolled her eyes and said, "Emma, nobody cares about your little computer games. This is exactly why you need to grow up and get serious about your future." The rejection stung, but what happened next changed everything. 2 weeks later, without telling me, Jessica took my laptop while I was at school and showed my app to her friends, not to support me, but to mock what I had created. She filmed herself and her friends laughing at my work, making jokes about my pathetic attempt to be a tech genius, and posted the video on social media with the caption, "When your little sister thinks she's the next Steve Jobs." The video got shared around our school, and I spent the rest of my senior year dealing with the humiliation of having my dreams turned into a public joke by the person who was supposed to love me most. That incident taught me something crucial about my family dynamics. My success wasn't just irrelevant to them, it was threatening. Jessica needed me to fail because my failure validated her choices and our parents' worldview. If I could actually build something meaningful with technology, it meant they had been wrong about what mattered and what was possible. It was easier to mock my ambitions than to consider that maybe their definition of success was too narrow. After graduation, I enrolled in the community college entrepreneurship program despite my family's disapproval. I moved into a tiny apartment near campus, working part-time at a coffee shop while taking classes and continuing to develop my app. My relationship with my family grew increasingly strained as they watched me choose what they saw as the harder, riskier path. Every family gathering became an opportunity for them to express their disappointment in my choices and their concern that I was wasting my potential on something they couldn't understand. The final break came during Jessica's engagement party. She had planned an elaborate celebration at a country club, complete with professional photography and a guest list that included everyone important in our extended family and social circle. I bought a new dress and arrived early to help with setup, hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. Instead, I found myself assigned to menial tasks, while Jessica's college friends were introduced as honored guests. When it came time for speeches, Jessica thanked everyone who had supported her journey to finding true love and building a real life, pointedly looking at me when she emphasized the word real. Later that evening, as guests mingled and celebrated, I overheard Jessica talking to a group of relatives about my post-graduation plans. She was describing my app development work as Emma's computer hobby that she thinks will make her rich someday, and telling them how worried she was that I was throwing my life away on fantasies instead of getting a real job like normal people. The laughter that followed her comments was meant to be heard. She wanted me to know that my dreams were a source of entertainment for the family, not pride or support. I left the party early, driving home in silence while trying to process the deliberate cruelty of what had just happened. Jessica hadn't just disagreed with my choices. She had turned them into a public spectacle for the amusement of our relatives. When I got home, I found a voicemail from Mom suggesting that maybe it was time for me to reconsider my priorities and stop embarrassing the family with unrealistic expectations. That's when I realized that my relationship with my family had become fundamentally toxic. They needed me to fail more than they wanted me to succeed. 3 months later, I received an acceptance letter to transfer to Ohio State's computer science program with partial scholarship funding. It was the opportunity I had dreamed about, a chance to be around other people who shared my interests and understood the potential of technology. When I told my family about the acceptance, their response was immediate and devastating. Dad said I was chasing pipe dreams instead of being grateful for what I had. Mom worried about the debt I would accumulate and the time I was wasting on something that might not work out. Jessica was the most direct in her opposition. She told me I was being selfish and irresponsible, that I was embarrassing our family by acting like I was too good for the life that had been perfectly fine for generations of our relatives. The conversation escalated into the worst fight we had ever had as a family. Voices were raised, accusations were made, and ultimately an ultimatum was delivered. Dad told me I could stay in Millbrook and act like a normal member of this family, or I could leave and pursue my computer fantasies without their support or blessing. Jessica added that if I chose to transfer to Ohio State, I shouldn't expect to be welcomed at family events anymore, because my attitude and unrealistic expectations were becoming too disruptive to family harmony. I was 20 years old, standing in the living room where I had grown up, being told to choose between my dreams and my family. The choice, when I really examined it, wasn't difficult. My family was asking me to give up the one thing that made me feel alive and capable and unique in exchange for their approval of a life that would make me miserable. They were asking me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. I couldn't do it. That night, I packed everything I owned into my car and left Millbrook. I transferred to Ohio State, took out student loans to cover what my part-time jobs couldn't, and threw myself into learning everything I could about computer science and business. The pain of losing my family was real and constant, but it was mixed with a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I could pursue my interests without having to justify or defend them to people who were determined not to understand. College introduced me to a world where my interests weren't weird or impractical. I met other students who were building apps, starting companies, and dreaming about changing the world through technology. I found professors who encouraged ambitious thinking and connected me with internship opportunities that taught me real-world skills. Most importantly, I met Maya Singh, who became my best friend and eventually my business partner. Maya understood my vision because she shared it, and together we started developing more sophisticated applications during our junior year. By the time I graduated, Maya and I had created TechFlow Solutions, a company focused on developing automation software for small businesses. We started in a shared workspace in downtown Cleveland, working 18-hour days and living on ramen noodles and coffee. Our first major client was a chain of local restaurants that needed better scheduling and inventory management systems. The software we created for them saved enough time and money that word began spreading to other small businesses facing similar challenges. The growth was gradual at first, then suddenly explosive. Within 2 years, we had 15 employees and clients across Ohio. By year 3, we had expanded to 3 states and were being featured in business magazines as one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the Midwest. I was named to a 30 under 30 list and invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and women in technology. The girl who had been mocked for her computer hobby was now running a company that employed over 200 people and generated millions in annual revenue. Through all of this success, I never contacted my family. The silence between us had become a protective barrier that I wasn't ready to remove. I heard through mutual friends that Jessica had gotten married and was expecting her first baby, that my parents were proud grandparents-to-be, and that my name was simply not mentioned in family conversations anymore. I had been erased from their narrative as completely as if I had never existed. Last month, that 4-year silence was broken by an unexpected phone call from Mom. Her voice was stiff and formal as she informed me that Jessica was having a baby shower and that I was invited to attend if I wanted to. There was no warmth. In the invitation, no acknowledgement of the years of separation or curiosity about what I had been doing with my life. It felt more like an obligation being fulfilled than a genuine desire for reconciliation. Still, something in me wanted to see if enough time had passed for us to find some middle ground, some way to rebuild what had been broken. I decided to attend the baby shower, not because I expected a warm welcome, but because I wanted to see if my family had changed as much as I had during our years apart. I bought an expensive gift, a high-end baby monitor system that connected to smartphones and tracked everything from room temperature to sleep patterns. It was the kind of technology-forward gift that the old Emma would have chosen, but now I could afford the premium version. Jessica's house in the upscale Oakwood Estates neighborhood was exactly what I had expected. It was large, perfectly maintained, and decorated with the kind of traditional elegance that made a statement about financial security and social status. The baby shower was held in her spacious backyard, under a white tent decorated with pink and gold streamers. Everything was professionally catered and carefully planned, the kind of event that would be photographed for social media and talked about for weeks afterward. When I arrived, I felt the familiar mixture of belonging and alienation that had defined my childhood. These were my relatives, people who had known me since birth, but I felt like an outsider observing a culture I no longer fully understood. The conversations revolved around traditional markers of success: marriages, mortgages, children, and stable jobs. I listened to cousins discuss their promotions at established companies, their children's academic achievements, and their vacation plans. My own accomplishments felt simultaneously massive and invisible in this context. Jessica looked radiant in a flowing pink dress that emphasized her pregnancy. She moved through the party like a queen holding court, accepting congratulations and gifts with gracious smiles and perfect manners. When she saw me, her expression flickered for just a moment before settling into the polite mask she had perfected over the years. She hugged me briefly and thanked me for coming, but there was nothing genuine in the interaction. I was a box, being checked, an obligation being fulfilled. As the party progressed, I found myself talking with various relatives and family friends, people who remembered me as Jessica's younger sister, but had no knowledge of what I had accomplished in the Y. Years since I left Millbrook, they asked polite questions about what I was doing with my life, and I gave equally polite but vague answers about working in technology. I wasn't ready to reveal the full scope of my success, partly because I wasn't sure how it would be received, and partly because I wanted to see how I was perceived without the filter of my achievements. The moment that changed everything came during the gift opening ceremony. Jessica was seated in a decorated chair in the center of the tent, surrounded by guests who oohed and awed over each present. When she reached my gift, she held up the Gyao, sophisticated baby monitor system, and read the card aloud. From Emma, with love for your new adventure. The gift was clearly expensive and thoughtful, but Jessica's reaction was telling. Instead of genuine appreciation, she held it up with a slightly mocking smile and said, "Leave it to Emma to pick the most complicated baby gadget she could find. I'm sure it does a million things I'll never need." The comment drew polite laughter from some guests, but it stung because it reduced my thoughtful gift to a stereotype about my relationship with technology. More painful was what came next. Jessica's college roommate, whom I had never met, asked who I was and what I did for work. Before I could answer, Jessica jumped in with a response that felt like a public execution. "This is my little sister, Emma," she announced to the gathered crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the tent. "She's the family failure who never learned how to live in the real world. She dropped out of college to waste her life playing with computers, and we've all been waiting for years for her to grow up and get a real job like normal people. She's always been the odd one out, thinking she's smarter than everyone else but never actually accomplishing anything meaningful." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as dozens of pairs of eyes turned to stare at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. In one moment, Jessica had reduced 4 years of unprecedented success to the same tired narrative of failure and delusion she had been telling about me since high school. She had used her baby shower, a celebration that should have been filled with joy and love, as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me in front of people who barely knew me. But then something unexpected happened. A man I didn't recognize, tall, with dark hair and kind eyes, stood up from his seat near the back of the tent. He looked confused and somewhat stunned as he walked toward where Jessica was sitting. I realized this must be Michael, her husband, whom I was meeting for the first time. The expression on his face was one of complete bewilderment as he approached his wife. "Jessica," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's my CEO." The words hung in the air like a revelation that nobody was prepared to process. Jessica's confident smile faltered as she looked up at her husband. With confusion? "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. Michael turned to look at me, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're Emma Rodriguez, aren't you? You founded TechFlow Solutions. I've been working for your company for 2 years. I just saw your photo in our company newsletter last week when you were featured for the expansion into Kentucky." The revelation hit the gathering like a physical force. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as people tried to process what they had just heard. Jessica's face went through a series of expressions, confusion giving way to disbelief and then to something approaching horror as she realized what had just happened. She had just called the CEO of her husband's company, the woman who signed his paychecks and was responsible for his career success, a failure who would never amount to anything. I stood there in that moment, surrounded by the same family members, who had mocked my dreams and dismissed my ambitions, watching as the narrative they had constructed about my life crumbled in real time. The quiet girl with the computer hobby was actually running the company that employed Jessica's husband. The family failure had built something that provided stable, well-paying jobs for hundreds of people, including the man Jessica had married specifically because he represented financial security. Michael continued talking, his voice filled with genuine admiration and excitement. "Emma, I had no idea you were Jessica's sister. Your leadership has transformed our department. The efficiency improvements from your latest software update saved our team hundreds of hours last quarter. And the expansion announcement you made at the company meeting was incredible. Opening 3 new offices and hiring 50 more developers. It's exactly the kind of vision that makes people excited to work for TechFlow." The contrast between Michael's words and Jessica's introduction couldn't have been more stark. One painted me as a respected leader building something meaningful, the other as a delusional failure living in a fantasy world. The truth was now obvious to everyone at the baby shower, and the uncomfortable silence reflected their struggle to reconcile these two completely different versions of who I was. Jessica looked like someone who had just been told that the earth was actually flat. Her carefully constructed narrative about her successful traditional life, and my failed unconventional one, had just been demolished in front of all the people whose opinions mattered most to her. She stammered something about not knowing I worked in technology, but everyone could hear the weakness in her voice. I realized that this was my moment to choose how this story would end. I could humiliate Jessica the way she had tried to humiliate me. I could list my accomplishments, describe the size and scope of my company, and make her feel as small as she had spent years trying to make me feel. The old Emma, the one who had been hurt and rejected and misunderstood, wanted revenge. She wanted Jessica to experience the same shame and embarrassment she had inflicted on me. But the Emma I had become through years of building something meaningful, of leading a team and taking responsibility for other people's livelihoods, made a different choice. I walked over to Jessica and spoke quietly, my voice calm and professional, despite the emotional storm I was feeling inside. "Congratulations on your pregnancy, Jess," I said simply. "Michael is lucky to work for a great company, and you're lucky to have him. I hope your baby brings you all the happiness you deserve." I turned to Michael and shook his hand. "Thank you for the kind words about TechFlow. You're part of an amazing team, and I'm proud to have you with the company. Enjoy the rest of the celebration." Then I walked away from the tent, through Jessica's perfectly manicured backyard and back to my car. I didn't look back, didn't wait for responses or explanations or apologies. I had said what needed to be said with grace and dignity, and that was enough. As I drove away from Millbrook for what I knew would probably be the last time, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 4 years ago, I had been told I was a failure who would never amount to anything. Today, I was the CEO of a successful company that employed over 200 people and generated millions in revenue. 4 years ago, I had been rejected by my family for choosing an unconventional path. Today, I had shown them the results of that choice with quiet dignity and professional grace. The girl who had been mocked for her computer hobby had grown into a woman who created technology that solved real problems for real people. The family failure had built something that provided stable careers and meaningful work for hundreds of individuals, including the man her sister had married for his reliable income. The dreamer they had dismissed as unrealistic had turned her dreams into a reality that exceeded anything they had thought possible. Most importantly, I had learned that success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about staying true to your vision even when nobody else can see it, even when the people closest to you try to convince you it's impossible. It's about building something meaningful and leading with integrity, not because anyone is watching or keeping score, but because that's who you choose to be. The phone in my car buzzed with a text message as I merged onto the highway heading back to Columbus. It was from Maya, asking how the baby shower had gone. I smiled as I dictated my response. "I'll tell you all about it when I get back to the office. We have a company to run." That's my story. Sometimes the people who know you least are the ones who think they can define who you are and what you're capable of achieving. But the only opinion that really matters is your own, and the only proof you need of your worth is the life you build with your own hands and your own choices. The drive back to Columbus that evening felt like traveling between two different worlds. In my rearview mirror was Millbrook, where I would always be the girl who didn't fit the mold, who made choices that threatened their comfortable understanding of how life should work. Ahead of me was the city where I had built something extraordinary, from nothing, where my decisions were respected and my vision was valued. The contrast between these two realities had never felt more stark than it did in the aftermath of Jessica's baby shower. My phone buzzed repeatedly during the hour-long drive, notifications I ignored while processing everything that had just happened. The silence in my car was heavy with the weight of years of accumulated hurt and the strange satisfaction of having my worth finally recognized, even if it took shocking my sister's husband for that recognition to occur. I had walked away from that baby shower with my dignity intact, but the emotional residue of Jessica's public humiliation lingered like smoke in my clothes. When I finally arrived at my downtown apartment, the modern space felt like a sanctuary. After the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood community, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and my walls were decorated with framed articles about TechFlow's success, awards from business organizations, and photos from conferences where I had been invited to speak about entrepreneurship. This was the life I had built for myself, evidence of the path I had chosen despite my family's disapproval. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto my couch, finally ready to check the messages that had been accumulating on my phone. Most were work-related, updates from my team about projects in progress and questions that could wait until Monday. But buried among the professional communications were several messages that made my stomach drop. Word about what had happened at the baby shower was already spreading through our extended family network. The first message was from my cousin Maria, who had witnessed Jessica's introduction and Michael's revelation. Her text was brief, but loaded with implications. Emma, I had no idea about your company. Jessica looked like she was going to be sick after you left. Everyone is talking about it. The follow-up message came an hour later. Mom wants to know if what Michael said is really true. Are you actually running a big tech company? Additional messages painted a picture of a family in chaos, struggling to reconcile the narrative they had maintained about me for 4 years with the reality that had been revealed in front of 30 witnesses. My Aunt Linda had texted asking if I would be willing to talk to her son about career opportunities in technology. My Uncle Robert wanted to know if TechFlow was hiring and whether I remembered him fondly enough to consider his resume. The speed with which my value in their eyes had shifted from 0 to significant was both amusing and depressing. The most surprising message came from my mother. After 4 years of minimal contact, she had sent a text that read, "Emma, I think we need to talk. There are things about your situation that we didn't understand. Can you call me this week?" The formal tone and careful phrasing revealed how little she actually knew about what I had accomplished, but the fact that she had reached out at all suggested that Michael's revelation had forced her to reconsider her assumptions about my life. I decided not to respond to any of the messages that night. The emotional whiplash of going from family failure to suddenly valuable family connection was too much to process immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and lost myself in work, reviewing financial projections for TechFlow's expansion into Kentucky and Tennessee. The familiar rhythm of analyzing data and planning strategic initiatives helped center me after the turbulence of the afternoon. Monday morning brought a return to the routine that had sustained me through 4 years of building my company. I arrived at TechFlow's offices early, as was my habit, using the quiet hours before the rest of the team arrived to tackle complex problems that required uninterrupted focus. Our workspace occupied 2 floors of a renovated building in Columbus's emerging tech district, and I had designed it to reflect the collaborative, innovative culture I wanted to foster. Maya was already at her desk when I walked through the main floor, surrounded by monitors displaying code and project timelines. She looked up as I passed, her expression curious and slightly concerned. We had been friends long enough that she could read my moods accurately, and something in my demeanor must have signaled that the baby shower had been more eventful than a typical family gathering. "How did Saturday go?" she asked, swiveling her chair to face me as I stopped beside her workstation. Maya knew the basic outline of my family history, understood why I had been estranged from them for years, but she had never experienced their treatment of me firsthand. Her own family had been supportive of her entrepreneurial ambitions from the beginning, making it difficult for her to fully comprehend the depth of rejection I had faced. I gave her a brief summary of the afternoon's events, watching her expression shift from sympathy to disbelief to something approaching anger as I described Jessica's public introduction and Michael's unexpected response. Maya had a protective streak when it came to people she cared about, and the idea that my own sister had tried to humiliate me in front of a crowd of strangers clearly infuriated her. Please tell me you unleashed every accomplishment we've achieved on her, Maya said, her voice tight with indignation. Please tell me you made her understand exactly how wrong she's been about you. I shook my head, explaining how I had chosen to take the high road, to congratulate Jessica on her pregnancy, and acknowledge Michael's work without making the moment about revenge or vindication. Maya studied my face carefully, recognizing that this decision had cost me something emotionally, even though it was the right choice professionally. You're a better person than I would have been in that situation, she said finally. But I hope you realize that what happened proves everything we've believed about the path we chose. You built something real, something that matters, something that provides good jobs for good people. That's not luck or accident. That's the result of vision and hard work and refusing to give up when everyone told you to be realistic. Her words carried weight because Maya had been with me through the most challenging phases of building TechFlow. She had worked 18-hour days in our cramped first office, survived on instant noodles and coffee during the months when we couldn't afford to pay ourselves regular salaries, and celebrated every small victory as we gradually grew from a two-person startup to a regional success story. She understood the sacrifices and risks that had led to our current position in ways that my family never could. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of meetings and strategic planning sessions. We were in the final stages of negotiating a major contract with a retail chain that would expand our client base significantly, and the legal and technical details required my full attention. The focused work was therapeutic, reminding me why I loved building this company and how much satisfaction I derived from solving complex problems with innovative solutions. Tuesday brought an unexpected phone call that forced me to confront the aftermath of Saturday's revelation more directly. Michael Thompson, Jessica's husband and my unwitting employee, had requested a meeting with me through our human resources department. The request was unusual enough that it made me curious about his motivations and concerned about potential complications for both his career and my relationship with Jessica. We met in my office late Tuesday afternoon, after the bulk of the day's meetings had concluded. Michael appeared nervous as he settled into the chair across from my desk, his usual professional confidence replaced by obvious uncertainty about how to navigate this unprecedented situation. I had seen him in company meetings before, knew him to be a competent developer and reliable team member, but this was our first one-on-one conversation. I want to apologize for what happened on Saturday, he began, his voice careful and formal. I had no idea that you and Jessica were estranged, and I certainly didn't know about the family dynamics that led to her introduction. I feel terrible that my response created such an awkward situation for everyone involved. I appreciated his directness, but wanted to make sure he understood that his professional standing wasn't affected by family drama. Michael, you have nothing to apologize for. You were surprised to discover a connection between your boss and your wife's sister, and you responded honestly. That's not something that requires an apology. He seemed relieved by my response, but still appeared to have more he wanted to say. After a moment of silence, he continued with obvious difficulty. The thing is, Emma, I've learned a lot about you as a leader over the past 2 years. Your vision for this company, the way you've built a culture that actually cares about employees, the innovation you've driven in our industry. When I heard Jessica describe you as a failure, it was so completely opposite to everything I know about your professional reputation that I couldn't process it. Michael paused, looking out the window at the Columbus skyline before meeting my eyes again. I've been thinking about this all weekend, and I need you to know that what I've observed about your leadership has nothing to do with family relationships. You've built something remarkable here, and the people who work for you respect what you've accomplished. That's based on your actions and decisions, not on anyone's opinion of your personal choices. His words were more meaningful than he probably realized. For years, I had wondered whether my family's assessment of my potential had some validity, whether their inability to see value in my ambitions reflected some fundamental flaw in my judgment or character. Having someone who knew me only through my professional work affirm the worth of what I had built provided a kind of validation that was entirely separate from the dramatic revelation at the baby shower. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him honestly. "Building this company has been the most challenging and rewarding thing I've ever done. But it's also been lonely at times because my family couldn't understand or support what I was trying to achieve. Knowing that the work speaks for itself means more than you might realize." We talked for another few minutes about his current projects and his thoughts about TechFlow's expansion plans. Michael was genuinely enthusiastic about the company's direction and excited about the opportunities our growth would create for the development team. His passion for the work reminded me why I had started this company in the first place: to create something meaningful that would provide fulfilling careers for talented people who shared my vision for innovation. After Michael left my office, I found myself reflecting on the strange irony of the situation. Jessica had married him specifically because he represented stability and conventional success, the kind of safe choice that my parents had always wanted me to make. Yet his career success was now directly dependent on the failure Jessica had mocked so publicly. The technology company that Jessica couldn't understand or respect was providing the financial security that made her comfortable suburban lifestyle possible. Wednesday brought another family-related complication when my phone rang during a staff meeting. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, knowing that she wouldn't contact me during business hours unless something significant had prompted her to reach out. Her voice sounded strained and uncertain as she asked if we could meet for lunch to discuss what had happened at the baby shower. I agreed to meet her on Friday at a restaurant halfway between Columbus and Millbrook, neutral territory that would allow us to have a conversation without the emotional weight of returning to my childhood home or forcing her to navigate my adult, professional environment. The prospect of this meeting filled me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. After 4 years of virtual silence, what could she possibly want to discuss that couldn't be handled over the phone? Thursday was consumed with a crucial presentation to the retail chain that could become our largest client. Maya and I had spent weeks preparing our proposal, developing custom solutions for their inventory management and employee scheduling challenges. The presentation went exceptionally well, with the client's leadership team asking detailed questions that demonstrated genuine interest in our capabilities and vision for their partnership. As we wrapped up the meeting, the client's CEO made a comment that stuck with me. "What impresses me most about TechFlow isn't just the technology you've developed, but the way you've built a company culture that attracts and retains top talent. That's not something you can fake or buy. It has to be authentic, and it has to come from leadership that people actually want to follow." Her observation reminded me of something I had learned through years of building this company. Authentic leadership isn't about proving yourself to people who doubt you. It's about creating value for people who share your vision and trust your judgment. The validation that mattered most wasn't my family's belated recognition of my success, but the respect I had earned from clients, employees, and industry peers who understood the work itself. Friday afternoon found me sitting across from my mother in a chain restaurant that felt like neutral ground between our two worlds. She looked older than I remembered, more uncertain and less confident in her opinions than the woman who had delivered ultimatums about my life choices 4 years earlier. The conversation started awkwardly, with stilted questions about my health and general well-being, but gradually moved toward the real reason for our meeting. "Emma, I need to understand what happened on Saturday," she said finally, her voice careful and measured. "Michael seemed to know a lot about your work, and he spoke about you like you were someone important in the business world. Is it true that you're running a large company?" The question revealed how completely my family had dismissed my ambitions over the years. They had been so convinced that my entrepreneurial efforts were doomed to failure that they had never bothered to check whether their predictions were accurate. For 4 years, I had been building something significant just an hour's drive from their home, but they had been so certain of my inadequacy that they hadn't considered the possibility of my success. I gave her a brief overview of TechFlow's growth and current scope, watching her expression shift from skepticism to surprise to something approaching awe as she processed the scale of what I had accomplished. When I mentioned our employee count and annual revenue, she actually gasped audibly, her assumptions about my life crumbling in real time. "But why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of accusation that immediately put me on the defensive. "If you were doing so well, why did you let us think you were struggling and wasting your potential?" The question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of our family dynamics that I wasn't sure how to address diplomatically. How could I explain that I had tried to share my excitement about my early successes, only to have my achievements dismissed as fantasy and delusion? How could I make her understand that their rejection had been so complete and hurtful that I had stopped trying to earn their approval or recognition? "Mom, I tried to share my vision with you and Dad and Jessica from the beginning," I said carefully. "When I showed you my first app, when I talked about my business plans, when I explained why I wanted to study entrepreneurship instead of following a traditional path. The response was always that I was being unrealistic, that I needed to grow up and get a real job like normal people. After a while, I stopped trying to convince you that my dreams were valid." She looked uncomfortable with this characterization of our family history, shifting in her seat and avoiding direct eye contact. "We were just worried about you," she said defensively. "Technology seemed so uncertain, so risky. We wanted you to have security and stability like Jessica." "But that's exactly the point," I replied, feeling years of suppressed frustration bubbling to the surface. "You couldn't imagine that my path might lead to security and stability because you couldn't understand the path itself. You decided that anything different from what you knew was automatically wrong or dangerous without ever trying to learn about what I was actually doing." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, touching on years of accumulated misunderstandings and missed opportunities for connection. My mother seemed genuinely surprised to learn about the extent of my professional success, but she also seemed unable to fully accept responsibility for the family's role in our estrangement. Her focus remained on what I could have done differently to maintain family relationships, rather than examining how their treatment of my ambitions had driven me away. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, she made one final attempt to bridge the gap between us. "Emma, I know we haven't handled this perfectly, but you're still our daughter. Maybe we could start over, try to understand each other better. Jessica is having a baby, and it would mean a lot to have you involved in our family again." I appreciated the gesture, but I also recognized that her motivation was complicated by the revelation of my professional success. The invitation to rejoin the family was coming now, after they had learned about my achievements, not because they had genuinely reconsidered their treatment of my choices or developed respect for my judgment. The timing made it difficult to trust that their change of heart was about love, rather than the social and financial benefits of being associated with my success. "I'm glad you reached out," I told her honestly. "And I'm happy for Jessica about the baby. But rebuilding trust is going to take time and genuine effort from everyone involved. I can't just pretend that 4 years of rejection didn't happen, because my professional success has finally made me worth acknowledging." The drive back to Columbus that afternoon was contemplative and emotionally draining. The conversation with my mother had clarified some things while complicating others. She had confirmed that my family's understanding of my life had been completely inaccurate, based on assumptions and prejudices rather than genuine curiosity about my actual experiences. But her attempt at reconciliation also felt conditional and self-serving in ways that made me cautious about the possibility of meaningful repair. That evening, Maya and I met for dinner at our favorite restaurant near the office, a ritual we had maintained since our early startup days when celebrating small victories was essential for maintaining morale during difficult periods. I filled her in on the week's family-related developments, including my conversations with Michael and my mother, while she provided the outside perspective I needed to process these complex emotional dynamics. "The thing that strikes me most about all of this," Maya observed as we shared a bottle of wine and reflected on the week's events, "is how their entire understanding of your worth shifted the moment they realized your professional success had implications for them. Michael's career, your mother's social standing, your cousin's job prospects. Suddenly, you're not a failure anymore because they need something from you." Her insight was painful but accurate. The same family members who had dismissed my ambitions as unrealistic fantasies were now reaching out because my success could benefit them directly. The technology they had mocked as a waste of time was now providing stable employment for Jessica's husband. The entrepreneurial path they had criticized as irresponsible was now generating opportunities they wanted to access for their own children. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if Michael hadn't been at that baby shower," I continued. "If he hadn't recognized me and spoken up about TechFlow, Jessica's narrative about me would have stood unchallenged. I would have left that party still being seen as the family failure, and none of them would have questioned their assumptions about my life or choices." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Which means their opinion of you was never really about you at all. It was about their own comfort level with uncertainty and change. They needed you to fail to validate their own choices, and now they need you to succeed because that success can benefit them. Either way, it's not actually about recognizing your worth as a person." Her observation helped clarify something I had been struggling to articulate about my emotional response to the week's events. The vindication I had felt at the baby shower was satisfying, but ultimately hollow because it was based on external validation rather than genuine recognition of my character or judgment. My family's newfound interest in my life felt conditional and transactional in ways that made meaningful reconciliation seem unlikely. As the week drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the strange turns my life had taken since leaving Millbrook 4 years earlier. I had built something extraordinary, created jobs for hundreds of people, and earned recognition in my industry as an innovative leader. Yet the family dynamics that had driven me away remained fundamentally unchanged. My success had shifted, their calculations about my value, but it hadn't altered their basic inability to understand or respect paths that differed from their own expectations. The realization was both liberating and melancholy. I no longer needed their approval or validation to know that my choices had been right, but I also had to accept that the family relationships I had once hoped to repair might be permanently damaged by years of mutual misunderstanding and accumulated hurt. The price of following my authentic path had been higher than I had anticipated when I packed my car and left home at 20 years old, but it had also led to rewards I couldn't have imagined at the time. Saturday morning brought a return to the routine that had sustained me through 4 years of building TechFlow into a regional success story. I arrived at the office early to review the final details of our expansion plans and prepare for the coming week's challenges. The familiar rhythm of strategic planning and problem-solving felt grounding after the emotional turbulence of reconnecting with my family's world. As I sat in my corner office, looking out at the Columbus skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but loaded with implications. "This is Jessica. We need to talk." The 3 words contained multitudes of unspoken tension, regret, and possibility, suggesting that the story that had begun at her baby shower was far from over. Jessica's text message sat on my phone screen like an unexploded bomb for 3 days before I decided to respond. The simple request, "We need to talk," carried the weight of 4 years of silence, a lifetime of sibling rivalry, and the earth-shattering revelation that had turned her baby shower into an unintentional moment of reckoning. Part of me wanted to ignore the message entirely, to let her stew in whatever mixture of embarrassment and curiosity had prompted her to reach out. But a larger part of me recognized that this conversation was inevitable and might be necessary for both of us to move forward. I finally replied on Tuesday evening after a particularly productive day at TechFlow. Our Kentucky expansion was ahead of schedule, and we had just signed the retail chain contract that Maya and I had been pursuing for months. The professional victories made me feel generous enough to extend an olive branch, though I was careful, to keep my expectations low. My response was neutral and practical. I'm available to meet this weekend if you want to drive to Columbus. Let me know what works for your schedule. Her reply came within minutes, suggesting an eagerness that surprised me. She proposed meeting on Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop near Ohio State's campus, neutral territory that held memories for both of us, but didn't belong to either of our current lives. The choice seemed deliberately symbolic, returning to the place where our paths had definitively diverged years earlier when I had chosen to pursue my unconventional dreams despite her ridicule and our parents' disapproval. The week leading up to our meeting was filled with speculation and nervous energy. Maya caught me checking my phone obsessively on Wednesday and immediately diagnosed the source of my distraction. "You're overthinking this," she said during our morning coffee ritual, her voice carrying the practical wisdom that had guided our business partnership through countless challenges. Jessica asked to talk, which means she has something to say that she couldn't communicate through other family members. Go listen to what she has to offer, but don't feel obligated to accept whatever apology or explanation she's prepared. Her advice was sound, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting represented something larger than a simple conversation between estranged sisters. The revelation at the baby shower had shattered the narrative that Jessica and our family had constructed about my life and choices. For 4 years, they had maintained their sense of superiority and righteousness by casting me as the foolish dreamer who had rejected practical wisdom in favor of unrealistic fantasies. Learning that those fantasies had actually generated more success and stability than Jessica's conventional choices had fundamentally destabilized their worldview. Thursday brought an unexpected complication when Michael appeared at my office door during lunch, looking nervous and carrying a manila folder that suggested this wasn't a casual social visit. I invited him in, curious about what could have prompted another meeting so soon after our previous conversation. He settled into the chair across from my desk with obvious discomfort, his usual professional confidence replaced by the uncertainty of someone navigating uncharted personal territory. "I need to ask you something that's probably inappropriate, and I want you to feel completely free to refuse," he began, his words careful and measured. "Jessica has been struggling since the baby shower. She's barely sleeping, barely eating. And she keeps talking about how she misjudged everything about your life and your choices. She asked me to find out more about TechFlow, about what you've actually accomplished, so she could understand what she missed." He opened the folder and spread several printed articles across my desk, publications I recognized from business, magazines, and tech industry websites. Someone had been doing thorough research, compiling a comprehensive picture of my professional achievements over the past 4 years. The articles covered TechFlow's founding, our major client wins, my inclusion on various rising entrepreneur lists, and recent coverage of our expansion plans. Seeing my career summarized in print felt surreal, especially knowing that Jessica had requested this information. "She spent hours reading these," Michael continued, his voice growing softer. "I think she's finally starting to understand the magnitude of what you've built and what she said about you at the shower. She keeps asking me questions about what it's like to work for you, what kind of leader you are, whether you remember specific employees or get involved in day-to-day operations. I think she's trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the CEO she's learning about." The image of Jessica poring over articles about my success felt both satisfying and sad. For years, she had dismissed my ambitions without bothering to learn anything about the industry I was entering or the problems I was trying to solve. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of my achievements, she was finally doing the research she should have done before passing judgment on my choices. The irony wasn't lost on me that her husband, whom she had married for his stability and conventional success, had been the one to educate her about the value of the path she had mocked. What exactly is she hoping to accomplish with this conversation? I asked, genuinely curious about Jessica's motivations. The sister I remembered was proud to a fault, someone who would rather maintain a comfortable fiction than admit she had been wrong about something important. The idea that she was willing to reach out and potentially acknowledge her misjudgment suggested either genuine personal growth or desperation prompted by the public nature of her error. Michael hesitated before answering, clearly unsure how much of Jessica's private thoughts he should share. "I think she's realizing that she never really knew you at all," he said finally. "She based her understanding of your potential on assumptions and stereotypes rather than actually paying attention to who you are and what you're capable of. The baby shower forced her to confront the possibility that she was wrong about something fundamental, and that's not easy for someone who's always been confident in her judgments." His observation touched on something that had bothered me throughout: our childhood and teenage years. Jessica had always possessed an unshakable confidence in her ability to assess people and situations, a certainty that made her feel superior to those who struggled with doubt or complexity. My choice to pursue an unconventional path had threatened that confidence because it suggested that her conventional wisdom might be limited or inadequate. Rather than questioning her assumptions, she had doubled down on her conviction that I was making a mistake. "I appreciate you sharing this context," I told Michael honestly. "It helps me understand what she might be thinking, even if I'm not sure what she expects from our conversation. 4 years is a long time to maintain complete silence, and it's going to take more than one meeting to repair the damage that was done." After Michael left, I found myself reflecting on the complexity of family dynamics and the way that professional success can force people to reconsider long-held beliefs about each other's character and potential. Jessica's research into my career represented a level of engagement with my actual life that she had never shown before, but it had taken a public humiliation for her to develop that curiosity. The timing made it difficult to trust that her newfound interest was motivated by genuine affection rather than embarrassment and social pressure. Friday afternoon brought another layer of complication when my assistant informed me that I had received an unexpected flower delivery. The arrangement was elegant and expensive: white lilies and roses with a card that read simply, "Looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Jessica." The gesture felt uncharacteristically humble for the sister I remembered, someone who had never apologized for anything and rarely acknowledged when she might have been wrong about something. Maya raised an eyebrow when she saw the flowers on my desk, immediately understanding their significance. "Well, that's interesting," she said, with the dry humor that had sustained our friendship through years of building a business together. Either she's genuinely remorseful, or she's trying to manage the situation because she realizes how bad she looked in front of all those people. Either way, she's putting in effort she's never made before. The observation was astute, as Maya's comments usually were. Jessica had always been someone who expected others to adapt to her preferences and accommodate her needs rather than making significant efforts to repair relationships she had damaged. The fact that she was taking initiative to arrange our meeting, conducting research about my career, and sending conciliatory gifts suggested either authentic personal growth or a calculated attempt to manage the social fallout from her public error. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Columbus weather that matched my ambivalent mood about the upcoming conversation. I chose my outfit carefully, wanting to look successful and professional without appearing to show off or make a point about my achievements. The goal was to project confidence and stability while remaining approachable enough for genuine dialogue if Jessica was actually prepared for honest communication. The coffee shop near campus was busier than I had expected for a Saturday afternoon, filled with students studying for exams and young professionals meeting friends for casual conversations. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in a quiet corner where we could talk privately without being overheard by neighboring customers. The familiar environment brought back memories of late-night study sessions during my brief time at Ohio State. when I had been figuring out how to balance traditional coursework with my growing entrepreneurial ambitions. Jessica arrived precisely on time, looking more nervous than I had ever seen her. She was impeccably dressed as always, but there was something subdued about her appearance that suggested the confidence that had always defined her public persona had been shaken by recent events. She spotted me immediately and walked over with careful steps, as if unsure of her welcome despite having initiated this meeting herself. "Emma," she said as she approached the table, her voice softer than I remembered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this is probably the last thing you wanted to do with your weekend." I gestured to the chair across from me, noting that she looked genuinely anxious in a way that seemed uncharacteristic for someone who had always been supremely confident in social situations. "I was curious about what you wanted to discuss," I replied honestly. "It's been 4 years since we've had a real conversation, and obviously a lot has changed for both of us." She settled into her chair and immediately began fidgeting with her purse strap, a nervous habit I remembered from our childhood that only emerged when she was genuinely worried about something. For several moments, she seemed to struggle with how to begin the conversation, opening her mouth to speak and then closing it again as if the words she had prepared were inadequate for the situation. "I need to apologize," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for what I said at the baby shower, but for everything. For years of dismissing your dreams, for mocking your ambitions, for never trying to understand what you were actually trying to accomplish. I was wrong about everything, and I'm sorry." The apology was more comprehensive and genuine than anything I had expected from Jessica, whose pride had always made admitting mistakes nearly impossible. I studied her face, looking for signs of calculation or manipulation. But what I saw instead was something that looked like genuine remorse, mixed with confusion about how to proceed. This was uncharted territory for both of us. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, not wanting to shut down the conversation, but also not ready to simply accept her words without understanding what had prompted this change of heart. "But I need to understand what's changed for you. 2 weeks ago, you introduced me to a room full of people as the family failure who would never amount to anything. What's different now?" Jessica winced at my direct reference to her baby shower introduction, her cheeks flushing with what appeared to be genuine embarrassment. "Everything is different," she said, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing in the conversation. "I spent this week learning about your company, reading articles about your success, talking to Michael about what it's like to work for you. I realized that I never actually knew anything about what you were doing or what you were capable of achieving." She paused and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a collection of saved articles and bookmarks. "Did you know that TechFlow was featured in Forbes last year as one of the fastest-growing companies in the Midwest? Did you know that you were invited to speak at a national conference about women in technology? Did you know that your software has revolutionized inventory management for hundreds of small businesses?" The questions came rapidly, as if she had been storing them up and needed to release them all at once. I realized that she was essentially reciting facts she had discovered during her recent research, trying to demonstrate that she had done the homework she should have completed years earlier. The effort was touching in its thoroughness, even if it came 4 years too late. "I knew all of those things because I lived them," I replied gently. "But I'm glad you took the time to learn about what I've been working on. It would have meant a lot to have that curiosity and support when I was just getting started and everything felt uncertain." Jessica nodded vigorously, as if my words confirmed something she had been thinking about extensively. "That's exactly what I keep coming back to," she said, her voice gaining momentum as she found her way into the conversation. "I never asked you to explain your vision or your business plan. I never tried to understand the problems you were solving or the market you were entering. I just assumed that because your path was different from mine, it must be wrong or unrealistic." The admission was significant because it acknowledged something beyond simple misjudgment. Jessica was recognizing that her dismissal of my ambitions had been based on willful ignorance rather than informed analysis. She had chosen not to understand my work because understanding it would have required acknowledging that her conventional wisdom might be incomplete. "What I can't figure out," she continued, her voice becoming more thoughtful, "is why you never pushed back harder against our assumptions. You had to know that what you were building was valuable and innovative. Why didn't you make us understand what we were missing?" The question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of power dynamics that I wasn't sure how to address diplomatically. How could I explain that I had tried repeatedly to share my excitement and vision, only to be met with dismissal and ridicule that eventually wore down my willingness to keep trying? How could I make her understand that the burden of proof shouldn't have been on me to convince my family that my dreams were valid? "Jessica, I tried to share my work with you and Mom and Dad for years," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Remember when I showed you my first app during my senior year of high school? You filmed yourself and your friends mocking it and posted the video online. Remember when I explained my business plan for TechFlow during my sophomore year of college? Dad called it a fantasy, and Mom suggested I consider more practical career options. After a while, I stopped trying to convince people who had already decided I was destined to fail." She looked stricken as I recounted these specific instances, memories that she had apparently forgotten or minimized in her own narrative about our family dynamics. The video incident in particular seemed to hit her hard, and I watched her face change as she recalled the cruelty of turning my work into public entertainment for her social media followers. "I remember that video," she said quietly, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine regret. "I thought I was being funny, but I was actually being cruel. I took something you had worked hard on and turned it into a joke because I was too ignorant to recognize its value. That must have been devastating for you." The acknowledgement of the video's impact was more than I had expected from Jessica, who had rarely shown empathy for how her actions affected other people. Hearing her recognize the cruelty of that moment helped explain why her current research into my success felt like such a dramatic reversal. She was finally confronting the reality of how wrong she had been, not just about my potential, but about the basic decency of her treatment of my ambitions. "It was devastating," I confirmed, allowing some of the old hurt to show in my voice. "But it was also clarifying. It helped me understand that I needed to build my life independently from family approval, because that approval was never going to come based on my actual achievements. You and Mom and Dad had already decided what kind of person I was and what I was capable of, and no amount of success was going to change those assumptions until something forced you to confront them directly." We sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of this conversation and the years of accumulated misunderstanding it was attempting to address. Jessica appeared to be struggling with emotions she wasn't accustomed to feeling, while I found myself caught between the satisfaction of finally being heard and the sadness of recognizing how unnecessary all this pain had been. "I want to try to make this right," Jessica said eventually, her voice determined but uncertain about how to proceed. "I know I can't undo 4 years of being wrong about everything, but I want to figure out how we can move forward. Michael talks about you with so much respect and admiration, and I want to understand the person who earned that kind of loyalty, from him and from all your other employees." Her mention of Michael reminded me of the complexity of the situation we were navigating. Her husband's career was now directly connected to my success, creating incentives for reconciliation that had nothing to do with genuine family affection. I appreciated her apparent sincerity, but I also needed to be realistic about the mixed motivations that might be driving her newfound interest in repair. "I appreciate that you want to rebuild our relationship," I said honestly, "but I need you to understand that this is going to be a long process that requires more than good intentions. 4 years of silence and rejection created real damage that can't be fixed with a single conversation and an apology, no matter how sincere." Jessica nodded emphatically, as if she had been expecting this response and had prepared herself for the possibility that forgiveness wouldn't come easily. "I understand that," she said. "I don't expect you to trust me immediately or pretend that everything is fine between us. I just want the chance to prove that I can be a better sister than I was before, someone who actually supports your goals, instead of undermining them." The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics that ranged from specific memories of our childhood conflicts to broader questions about family loyalty and personal growth. Jessica asked detailed questions about TechFlow's development, showing genuine curiosity about the challenges I had faced and the decisions that had led to our current success. For the first time in our relationship, she seemed interested in understanding my perspective rather than simply waiting for her turn to speak. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Jessica made one final request that surprised me with its thoughtfulness. "Would you be willing to let me attend one of your speaking engagements or company events?" she asked. "I want to see you in your professional environment, to understand what you've built from your perspective rather than just reading about it in articles. I think it would help me appreciate not just what you've accomplished, but who you've become." The request was unexpected, but seemed genuinely motivated by curiosity rather than social climbing or networking opportunism. Jessica appeared to recognize that she needed to see me in my element to fully understand the transformation that had occurred during our years of separation. The idea of having her witness my professional life felt both vulnerable and potentially healing. "I have a panel discussion next month about entrepreneurship and innovation," I told her. "It's open to the public, and you're welcome to attend if you're genuinely interested. But I want to be clear that this isn't about impressing you or proving my worth. It's about giving you the opportunity to see who I am now, independent of who you remember me being." Jessica's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine excitement and gratitude. "I would love that," she said. "And I promise I'm not looking for you to impress me. I'm looking to understand you, which is something I should have been doing all along." As we walked out of the coffee shop together, I found myself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship, while also remaining realistic about the challenges that lay ahead. Jessica's willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and invest effort in understanding my perspective was encouraging, but trust would need to be rebuilt gradually through consistent actions rather than emotional conversations. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process the afternoon's revelations and their implications for my family relationships moving forward. Jessica's transformation seemed genuine, but I couldn't ignore the fact that it had taken a public humiliation for her to develop curiosity about my actual life and achievements. The timing made it difficult to separate authentic personal growth from damage control motivated by social embarrassment. That evening, Maya called to check on how the meeting had gone, her voice carrying the protective concern that had characterized our friendship since college. I gave her a detailed summary of the conversation, including Jessica's comprehensive apology and her request to attend my upcoming speaking engagement. Maya listened without interruption, asking thoughtful questions that helped me clarify my own feelings about the afternoon's developments. "It sounds like she's finally doing the work she should have done years ago," Maya observed when I finished my recap. "The question is whether this new version of Jessica is sustainable or whether she'll revert to her old patterns once the immediate crisis of embarrassment passes. People can change, but family dynamics are particularly resistant to genuine transformation." Her skepticism was well-founded and reflected concerns I had been trying to articulate throughout the week. Jessica's current humility and curiosity were encouraging, but they had emerged in response to external pressure rather than internal growth. Time would tell whether her newfound respect for my choices would persist when the social consequences of her previous dismissiveness had faded from memory. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the strange twists my life had taken since deciding to attend Jessica's baby shower 2 weeks earlier. A simple family obligation had triggered a series of revelations and conversations that were forcing all of us to reconsider assumptions we had maintained for years. The process was emotionally exhausting, but potentially necessary for any kind of authentic relationship moving forward. My phone buzzed with a text message as I was turning off the lights, a follow-up from Jessica that felt like a natural conclusion to our afternoon together. "Thank you for giving me the chance to apologize and explain," she had written. "I know I have a lot of work to do to earn back your trust, but I'm committed to doing that work. See you next month at your speaking event." The message struck me as genuinely humble and realistic about the challenges ahead, qualities I hadn't associated with Jessica in years. Whether this represented lasting change or temporary adaptation remained to be seen, but for the first time since leaving Millbrook 4 years earlier, I felt hopeful about the possibility of having a sister who actually knew and supported who I had become. 3 weeks after my coffee shop meeting with Jessica, I stood backstage at the Columbus Convention Center, adjusting my microphone and reviewing my notes for the Women in Innovation panel discussion. The event had drawn over 800 attendees from across the Midwest, including entrepreneurs, investors, students, and corporate executives interested in hearing about the challenges and opportunities facing women in technology. As one of the featured speakers, I was scheduled to discuss TechFlow's journey and share insights about building a company culture that attracts and retains top talent. Maya stood beside me in the wings, offering last-minute encouragement and checking that my presentation slides were loaded correctly on the backstage monitors. She had been my constant supporter through every major milestone of our company's growth, and having her present for this speaking engagement felt like completing a circle that had begun in our cramped first office 4 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to address an audience about overcoming obstacles and pursuing unconventional paths, while my sister sat somewhere in that same audience, finally ready to understand the journey she had dismissed for so long. "Remember to mention the Kentucky expansion when you talk about scaling challenges," Maya whispered, as the event coordinator signaled that we had 5 minutes until showtime. "And don't forget to emphasize how important it's been to hire people who share our values, rather than just checking boxes for technical skills. That always resonates with this kind of audience." Her advice was practical and grounded in years of experience presenting TechFlow's story to various audiences, but I could hear the underlying emotion in her voice. This panel represented more than just another speaking opportunity. It was a public validation of everything we had built together, a chance to inspire other women who might be facing the same skepticism and dismissal that had characterized my early entrepreneurial journey. The personal significance of having Jessica witness this moment added another layer of meaning to what was already an important professional milestone. As the moderator began introducing the panel participants, I caught a glimpse of the audience through a gap in the stage curtains. The crowd was diverse in age and background, ranging from college students taking notes on tablets to seasoned executives comparing business cards during the pre-event networking session. Somewhere in that sea of faces was Jessica experiencing my professional world for the first time and hopefully beginning to understand the scope of what I had accomplished despite her family's lack of faith in my vision. The panel discussion began with each speaker providing a brief overview of their company and their path to entrepreneurship. When my turn came, I spoke about TechFlow's evolution from a dormitory-based startup to a regional leader in business automation software, emphasizing the importance of solving real problems for real clients rather than chasing trendy technologies or pursuing venture capital for its own sake. The audience was engaged and responsive, asking thoughtful questions about our hiring practices, our approach to work-life balance, and our strategies for competing against larger, more established companies. One question from a young woman in Tatansakannik, the third row, particularly resonated with my own experience. How do you handle it when people close to you don't understand or support your entrepreneurial ambitions? How do you maintain confidence in your vision when the people whose opinions matter most are telling you that you're making a mistake? The question could have been written specifically for my situation, and I found myself speaking more personally than I had planned. That's one of the hardest aspects of choosing an unconventional path, I began, my voice carrying the weight of years of experience navigating exactly this challenge. The people who love us often express that love by trying to protect us from risk and uncertainty. They may genuinely believe they're offering wisdom when they encourage us to choose safer, more traditional options. I paused, thinking about Jessica sitting somewhere in the audience and wondering how she was processing these words. But here's what I've learned. You can't build something extraordinary by seeking permission from people who don't share your vision. That doesn't mean you should dismiss all advice or ignore the concerns of people who care about you. It means you need to develop the internal confidence to pursue your goals even when external validation isn't available. The response from the audience was immediate and positive, with several people nodding enthusiastically and others taking notes on their phones. The moderator followed up by asking about specific strategies for maintaining motivation during difficult periods, and I shared some of the practical approaches that had sustained me through TechFlow's early challenges. Finding mentors who understood my industry, celebrating small victories to maintain momentum, and focusing on the problems I was solving rather than the obstacles I was facing. As the panel discussion continued, I found myself feeling increasingly comfortable and confident in this environment. This was my world, the professional community where my ideas were valued and my achievements were recognized based on their merits rather than their conformity to traditional expectations. The contrast with my family environment was stark and illuminating, highlighting just how much my sense of self-worth had been shaped by spending time with people who understood and appreciated what I was trying to accomplish. The question and answer session extended beyond the scheduled time due to audience engagement, with people asking detailed questions about everything from technical implementation challenges to strategies for maintaining company culture during rapid growth. One particularly insightful question came from a middle-aged man who asked about the role of failure in entrepreneurial success, and I was able to share specific examples of TechFlow's early setbacks and how they had ultimately strengthened our approach to product development and client relationships. When the panel finally concluded, I was approached by dozens of audience members who wanted to continue conversations, exchange contact information, or explore potential collaborations. The networking session that followed was energizing and productive, reinforcing my sense that I belonged in this community of innovators and risk-takers who were working to solve meaningful problems through technology and entrepreneurship. About 30 minutes into the networking reception, I spotted Jessica making her way through the crowd toward where I was standing near the registration table. She looked somewhat overwhelmed by the bustling professional atmosphere, but her expression was one of fascination rather than intimidation. When she reached me, she waited patiently while I finished a conversation with a potential client before stepping forward to introduce herself. "Emma, that was incredible," she said, her voice filled with what appeared to be genuine awe and admiration. "I had no idea what these kinds of events were like, or how respected you are in this community. Watching you answer those questions and seeing how people responded to your insights, it was like seeing a completely different person than the sister I thought I knew." Her words carried emotional weight that went beyond simple congratulations, suggesting that witnessing my professional life had been as transformative for her as I had hoped it might be. She seemed genuinely moved by the experience of seeing me in my element, surrounded by peers who valued my expertise and sought my advice on their own entrepreneurial challenges. "There were moments during your presentation when I felt so proud to be your sister, and then immediately ashamed that I had never felt that pride before," she continued, her voice becoming softer and more vulnerable. "All those years when I was telling people you were wasting your time on computer games, you were actually developing expertise that hundreds of people in this room would love to learn from." The admission was painful to hear, but also validating, in ways I hadn't expected. Jessica's recognition of her own ignorance felt more meaningful than simple praise, because it acknowledged the depth of misunderstanding that had characterized our relationship for so long. She wasn't just complimenting my current success. She was recognizing that her previous dismissal had been based on fundamental misperceptions about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. Maya joined our conversation a few minutes later, introducing herself to Jessica with the warmth and professionalism that had made her such an effective business partner. The three of us talked for nearly an hour about TechFlow's history, our expansion plans, and the challenges of building a company culture that prioritizes innovation while maintaining stability for employees like Michael, who depend on us for their financial security. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about our decision-making processes, our approach to hiring and promotion, and our strategies for staying competitive in a rapidly evolving industry. Her curiosity seemed genuine and informed, suggesting that she had continued researching the technology sector since our coffee shop meeting and was making a real effort to understand the context in which my success had occurred. "I keep thinking about something you said during the panel," Jessica told me as the reception was winding down. "About not seeking permission from people who don't share your vision. I realize now that I was one of those people, and worse, I was actively trying to discourage you from pursuing something that has turned out to be exactly what the world needed." She paused, looking around the convention center at the groups of professionals still engaged in animated conversations about their projects and ambitions. "This whole community exists because people like you were willing to ignore people like me, who couldn't see past their own limited understanding of what was possible. That's humbling in a way I'm still trying to process." Her reflection demonstrated a level of self-awareness that impressed me and suggested that her transformation might be more substantial than I had initially believed. She wasn't just acknowledging that she had been wrong about my specific choices. She was recognizing that her entire framework for evaluating risk and innovation had been inadequate and narrow-minded. As we prepared to leave the convention center, Jessica made a request that surprised me with its thoughtfulness and specificity. "Would you be willing to have dinner with Michael and me next week? Not as a family obligation or an attempt to repair our relationship overnight, but as an opportunity for us to understand your world better and maybe share some insights about our own perspectives on family and career and building a life together?" The invitation felt different from previous family gatherings because it acknowledged that we were adults with distinct perspectives and achievements rather than falling back into childhood roles and dynamics. Jessica seemed to recognize that any meaningful relationship moving forward would need to be built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's lives, rather than obligation or shared history. "I think that could be valuable for all of us," I replied, appreciating the mature approach she was taking to rebuilding our connection. "Michael and I have a good working relationship, and it might be interesting to explore how that translates to a personal context. Plus, I'd like to hear about your own experiences building a marriage and preparing for parenthood. Those are challenges I haven't faced yet, and I could probably learn from your perspectives." The acknowledgement that Jessica had expertise and experiences that could benefit me seemed to surprise and please her, perhaps because our previous dynamic had been so competitive and one-sided. The idea that we might actually have things to offer each other as adults was novel but promising, suggesting the possibility of a relationship based on mutual enrichment rather than constant comparison and judgment. A week later, Michael and Jessica invited me to their home for dinner, creating an opportunity to see their life together in their own environment rather than the neutral territory of restaurants or coffee shops. Their house in Oakwood Estates was beautifully decorated and obviously comfortable, reflecting the stability and security that Jessica had always prioritized in her life choices. The baby's nursery was nearly complete, painted in soft yellows, and decorated with care and attention to detail that spoke to their excitement about becoming parents. The dinner conversation was remarkably natural and wide-ranging, covering topics from TechFlow's latest client wins to Jessica and Michael's preparations for parenthood to broader questions about work-life balance and career satisfaction. For the first time in our adult lives, Jessica and I were able to talk as equals with different but equally valid perspectives on success and fulfillment. Michael shared insights about TechFlow's company culture from an employee's perspective, describing how our emphasis on professional development and work-life balance had attracted him to the company and kept him engaged despite offers from larger corporations. His observations helped me understand how our values and policies were experienced by team members, providing valuable feedback that I could use to refine our approach as we continued growing. Jessica, meanwhile, talked openly about her own journey toward understanding what she wanted from life and career, acknowledging that her previous certainty about the superiority of traditional paths had been shaken by witnessing alternative approaches to success and fulfillment. She seemed genuinely curious about my experiences as a female CEO in a male-dominated industry and asked thoughtful questions about the challenges and opportunities that had shaped my leadership style. I've been thinking a lot about the advice I want to give our daughter when she's old enough to make her own career choices, Jessica said during dessert, her hand resting on her growing belly. A few months ago, I would have encouraged her to prioritize stability and conventional success. Now I'm wondering whether that approach might limit her potential, rather than protecting her from disappointment. The reflection revealed how profoundly our recent interactions had affected Jessica's worldview, forcing her to question assumptions that had guided her own life choices and her judgments about mine. The possibility that she might encourage her daughter to take risks and pursue unconventional paths represented a complete reversal of the values she had expressed throughout our childhood and young adulthood. I think the key is helping her develop the confidence and skills to pursue whatever path feels authentic to her, I replied, thinking about the mentors and supporters who had made my own journey possible. Whether that's a traditional career or an entrepreneurial venture or something that doesn't exist yet, the important thing is making sure she knows that her worth isn't determined by other people's approval of her choices. Michael nodded enthusiastically, adding his own thoughts about the importance of teaching children to evaluate opportunities based on their own values and interests, rather than external expectations. The conversation evolved into a broader discussion about parenting philosophy and the challenge of providing guidance while encouraging independence, topics that felt surprisingly natural to discuss despite our complicated family history. As the evening concluded, Jessica walked me to my car and made one final observation that seemed to capture the transformation that had occurred in our relationship over the past month. "You know what strikes me most about tonight?" she said, her voice thoughtful and slightly amazed. "We talked for 3 hours, and not once did I feel like I needed to defend my choices or prove that my path was better than yours. For the first time, I felt like we were just two adults sharing our different experiences and learning from each other." Her comment highlighted something I had noticed as well: the competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood had been replaced by genuine curiosity and mutual respect. We were no longer locked in a struggle to prove whose approach to life was superior. Instead, we were exploring how our different paths had led to different but equally valid forms of success and satisfaction. 6 months later, I received a birth announcement for Jessica's daughter, accompanied by a personal note that brought tears to my eyes. "Emma," she had written, "I hope that someday Sophia will have the courage to pursue her dreams the way you pursued yours, and that she'll have a family that supports her vision from the beginning, rather than learning to appreciate it only after she's proven them wrong. Thank you for showing me what's possible when someone refuses to accept other people's limitations." The message represented the complete transformation of our relationship and Jessica's understanding of what I had accomplished through years of persistence and determination. More importantly, it suggested that the next generation of our family might grow up with different values and expectations, surrounded by adults who understood that there are many valid paths to a meaningful life. Today, Jessica and I maintain a relationship that would have been impossible to imagine during my college years when I was sleeping in my car and building TechFlow from nothing. We text regularly, share professional updates and personal milestones, and genuinely enjoy each other's company during family gatherings. Michael continues to thrive at TechFlow, having been promoted to lead our Kentucky expansion team, and baby Sophia has become the center of our extended family's attention and affection. The most meaningful change, however, has been in how we talk about success and ambition within our family. Instead of dismissing unconventional paths as unrealistic or dangerous, We've learned to ask questions, offer support, and trust that people are capable of making good decisions about their own lives, even when those decisions don't match our own preferences or experiences. Looking back on that devastating baby shower moment when Jessica introduced me as the family failure, I realize it was actually the catalyst for the most important transformation in our family's history. The public nature of her error forced all of us to confront assumptions we had maintained for years and open the door to genuine understanding and mutual respect. Sometimes the people who think they know you best are actually the people who know you least, because they've never bothered to look beyond their own expectations and prejudices. But sometimes, if you're patient and fortunate, those same people can surprise you with their capacity for growth and their willingness to admit when they've been wrong about something fundamental. The girl who was once called a family failure is now CEO of a company that employs over 300 people and has been recognized as one of the fastest-growing businesses in the Midwest. But more importantly, she's someone who learned that true success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about building something meaningful while staying true to your own values and vision. My story proves that the only opinion that really matters is your own, and the only permission you need to pursue your dreams is the permission you give yourself. Sometimes the best thing you can do for the people who doubt you is to succeed so thoroughly that they have no choice but to reconsider everything they thought they knew about what's possible. 2 years after Sophia's birth, I found myself standing in the same Columbus Convention Center where Jessica had first witnessed my professional world. But this time, the context was entirely different. TechFlow had been selected to receive the Ohio Small Business Excellence Award, and I was preparing to deliver the keynote address at the annual State Economic Development Summit. The audience of 800 included government officials, business leaders, and entrepreneurs from across Ohio, representing the culmination of a journey that had begun in a cramped dorm room with nothing but determination and a laptop. Maya stood beside me backstage. But this time, she wasn't just my business partner checking presentation slides. 6 months earlier, we had restructured TechFlow's leadership to reflect our company's growth and our own evolving roles. Maya had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, taking responsibility for day-to-day operations while I focused on strategic vision and external partnerships. The transition had been seamless because our collaboration had always been built on mutual respect and complementary strengths, rather than ego or hierarchy. Remember to mention the Columbus Tech Incubator program when you talk about supporting emerging entrepreneurs, Maya said, adjusting her own notes for the panel discussion she would join after my keynote. The governor specifically requested that we highlight public-private partnerships in innovation development. Her advice carried the weight of experience gained through 5 years of navigating Ohio's business and political landscape together. TechFlow had grown from a regional success story to a recognized leader in business automation software, with clients in 12 states and expansion plans that would take us nationwide within 2 years. More importantly, we had maintained the company culture and values that had attracted talented people like Michael and dozens of others who had built their careers with us. As I reviewed my keynote notes one final time, I caught sight of a familiar figure in the VIP seating area visible through the stage monitor. Jessica sat in the front row, holding 2-year-old Sophia on her lap, while Michael saved seats for my parents, who were driving up from Millbrook for the ceremony. The image of my family gathered to celebrate my achievements would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier, but it now felt natural and appropriate rather than surprising or vindictive. The transformation in our family dynamics had been gradual, but profound, built through consistent small interactions rather than dramatic reconciliation moments. My parents had attended Sophia's first birthday party, where Dad had awkwardly but sincerely congratulated me on TechFlow's expansion into Tennessee. Mom had started forwarding me articles about women in technology, usually accompanied by brief messages expressing pride in my accomplishments. The gestures were small, but they represented a fundamental shift from dismissal to engagement that had made meaningful relationship possible. Jessica's own evolution had been the most remarkable to witness. She had returned to work part-time, As a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit, applying organizational skills and social media expertise she had developed during her years as a stay-at-home mom. More significantly, she had become an advocate for entrepreneurship and innovation within our extended family and social circle, often sharing TechFlow's story as an example of what was possible when people pursued unconventional paths with persistence and vision. The keynote address went exceptionally well, with the audience responding enthusiastically to my message about the importance of supporting diverse approaches to economic development and innovation. I spoke about TechFlow's journey from startup to regional leader, emphasizing the role that mentors, clients, and employees had played in our success, while acknowledging the challenges that had strengthened our resolve and clarified our values. The standing ovation that followed felt like validation, not just of my company's achievements, but of the path I had chosen despite years of family skepticism. During the networking reception that followed the ceremony, I was approached by dozens of people interested in learning more about TechFlow's growth strategies, our hiring practices, and our plans for continued expansion. The conversations were energizing and productive, reinforcing my sense that we had built something genuinely valuable that solved real problems for real businesses while creating meaningful careers for our team members. One particularly memorable conversation occurred with a young woman who reminded me of myself at 22, full of ambitious ideas and frustrated by family members who couldn't understand her entrepreneurial vision. She had developed an innovative app for sustainable agriculture, but was struggling to convince her parents that leaving her corporate job to pursue her startup full-time was a reasonable risk rather than an act of self-destruction. "Everyone keeps telling me I'm throwing away my security for a pipe dream," she said, her voice carrying the familiar mixture of determination and doubt that I remembered from my own early days. "How did you maintain confidence in your vision when the people closest to you were convinced you were making a terrible mistake?" The question transported me back to those lonely nights in my car, surviving on instant noodles and determination. While building the foundation of what would become TechFlow, I thought about the rejection letter I had kept taped to my laptop, the mentors who had believed in my potential when my own family couldn't, and the small victories that had sustained me through periods of uncertainty and external skepticism. "The hardest part isn't proving that your critics are wrong," I told her honestly. "The hardest part is learning to trust your own judgment, even when you don't have external validation." But here's what I discovered. The people who love you but don't understand your vision will eventually come around if you succeed with integrity and generosity. The key is not to build your company to prove them wrong, but to build it because you believe in the value you're creating. Our conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, covering practical strategies for maintaining motivation during difficult periods, approaches to finding mentors and advisors who understood her industry, and methods for measuring progress when traditional metrics didn't apply to innovative ventures. By the end of our discussion, she seemed more confident and focused, armed with specific steps she could take to advance her agricultural technology startup, while maintaining relationships with family members who didn't yet understand her choices. After the reception concluded, my family gathered for dinner at an upscale restaurant near the convention center. The meal felt celebratory, but also comfortably normal, reflecting how our relationships had evolved from conflict and misunderstanding to genuine mutual interest and support. Sophia was the center of attention, charming everyone with her developing vocabulary and infectious curiosity about the world around her. "Aunt Emma, tell me about computers," Sophia said during dessert, her 2-year-old pronunciation making the request both adorable and profound. The question prompted laughter from the adults, but it also highlighted something significant about the values and expectations that would shape the next generation of our family. "Computers are tools that help people solve problems and create new things," I explained, speaking directly to Sophia while aware that the adults were listening carefully to my approach. "Some people use them to make art, some people use them to help businesses work better, and some people use them to connect with friends and family far away. The important thing is to use them to make life better for yourself and other people." Jessica smiled as she listened to my explanation, nodding approvingly at the balance between enthusiasm and responsibility in my message. Sophia is going to grow up understanding that technology is just one of many tools people can use to build meaningful lives, she said. She'll never have to choose between family support and pursuing her own vision, whatever that turns out to be. The comment reflected the fundamental shift that had occurred in our family's approach to ambition and success. Instead of viewing unconventional paths as threats to stability and security, we had learned to see them as opportunities for innovation and growth that could benefit entire communities when pursued with skill and integrity. Sophia would inherit a family legacy that valued both traditional stability and entrepreneurial risk-taking, preparing her to make informed decisions about her own future without the burden of rigid expectations or limiting assumptions. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation that surprised me with its emotional depth and specificity. "Emma, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago," he began, his voice carrying a vulnerability I had rarely heard from him. "When you left home to pursue your business dreams, I was scared that you were going to fail and get hurt. I thought I was protecting you by trying to convince you to choose a safer path." He paused, looking out the restaurant window at the Columbus skyline that had become the backdrop for my professional success. What I didn't understand is that the safe path isn't actually safe if it prevents someone from developing their full potential. You've built something remarkable, not just in terms of business success, but in terms of the positive impact you've had on hundreds of employees and thousands of clients. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize the value of what you were trying to do. His apology was more comprehensive and emotionally resonant than anything I had expected from a man who had rarely discussed feelings or admitted mistakes throughout my childhood. The acknowledgement of his fear-based motivation helped me understand his previous opposition to my choices while appreciating the courage it took for him to reconsider his assumptions and admit when he had been wrong about something fundamental. "Dad, I appreciate you saying that," I replied, feeling years of accumulated tension finally dissolving. "I understand that your concerns came from love and a desire to protect me from disappointment. The important thing is that we've all learned something from this experience about the importance of supporting each other's authentic paths, even when those paths look different from what we might have chosen ourselves." 6 months after the awards ceremony, TechFlow announced its most ambitious expansion yet: the opening of offices in Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh, creating over 200 new jobs and establishing us as a truly regional leader in business automation software. The expansion was covered extensively in business media, with several articles highlighting our employee-centered culture and our commitment to supporting local economic development in each city where we operated. The success brought new challenges and opportunities, including acquisition offers from larger technology companies and investment proposals from venture capital firms interested in funding even more aggressive growth. Maya and I spent weeks evaluating these options, ultimately deciding to maintain our independence while accepting strategic partnerships that would accelerate our development of new products and services. During this period of rapid growth and external recognition, I received an unexpected phone call from my old business teacher, Ms. Chen, who had provided crucial encouragement during my high school years when my family couldn't understand my entrepreneurial ambitions. She had been following TechFlow's success through industry publications and wanted to invite me to speak at Millbrook High School's Career Day, sharing my story with students who might be facing similar skepticism about unconventional career paths. "I still have the business plan you wrote for my class 15 years ago," she told me during our phone conversation. "Your vision for using technology to solve small business problems was so clear and specific, even when you were 17 years old. I'd love for current students to hear about how that teenage vision became the foundation for everything you've built since then." The invitation felt like completing a circle that had begun with her support during those crucial high school Years when my family couldn't see the value in my interests and ambitions. Speaking to students in my hometown, in the same classroom where I had first articulated my entrepreneurial vision, would provide an opportunity to directly impact young people who might be struggling with similar family dynamics and self-doubt. The Career Day presentation at Millbrook High School drew an audience of over 300 students, parents, and community members, making it one of the largest events in the school's recent history. My talk focused on the practical steps that had led from teenage business plans to regional company leadership, emphasizing the importance of persistence, continuous learning, and surrounding yourself with people who understand and support your goals. During the question and answer session, a senior asked about the role that family support had played in my success, creating an opportunity to address the complexity of pursuing ambitious goals while maintaining important relationships. I spoke honestly about the challenges of building something meaningful when the people closest to you don't initially understand or support your vision, while also acknowledging the eventual transformation that had occurred in my own family relationships. The people who love you want to protect you from failure and disappointment, I explained to the audience of teenagers and their parents. Sometimes that protective instinct can feel like opposition to your dreams, but it's usually rooted in genuine care and concern. The key is to prove through your actions and achievements that your vision is sound, while remaining open to the possibility that your relationships can evolve as people learn more about what you're actually trying to accomplish. After the bye presentation, I was approached by several students interested in technology careers and entrepreneurship, as well as parents who wanted advice about supporting children with ambitious goals that didn't fit traditional expectations. One mother thanked me for providing language and concepts that would help her communicate more effectively with her daughter, who wanted to start a social media marketing business instead of attending college immediately after graduation. The most meaningful conversation occurred with a teenage girl whose situation reminded me powerfully of my own high school experience. She had developed a mobile app for organizing volunteer activities, but was struggling to convince her family that pursuing computer science and entrepreneurship was a viable path for someone from their small Ohio town. Everyone keeps telling me that girls like me don't succeed in technology and that I should focus on more realistic goals, she said, her voice carrying the familiar mixture of determination and doubt that I remembered from my own teenage years. How did you keep believing in yourself when everyone around you was convinced you were going to fail? Her question took me back to those late nights in my childhood bedroom, teaching myself programming languages and building websites for local businesses, while my family dismissed my efforts as a waste of time. I remembered the isolation and frustration of having big dreams in a small town where those dreams were seen as evidence of unrealistic expectations rather than promising potential. I kept a folder of every positive response I received from clients, every small success, every piece of evidence that my work was creating real value for real people, I told her honestly. When everyone around you is focused on the reasons, your dreams might not work out. You have to become your own source of validation and encouragement. But here's the important part. You also have to stay open to the possibility that the people who doubt you now might become your biggest supporters once they understand what you're actually capable of achieving. As I drove back to Columbus, that evening, I reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought me from teenage outcast to regional business leader to role model for the next generation of young entrepreneurs. The girl who had once been dismissed as unrealistic and impractical was now being invited to share her insights about turning vision into reality, about building something meaningful despite initial skepticism and opposition. 3 years later, I received a graduation announcement from that same teenage girl, who had been accepted to MIT's computer science program with a full scholarship based on her innovative app development work. Her accompanying note mentioned that she had started a technology mentorship program at Millbrook High School, helping other students develop the confidence to pursue ambitious goals despite limited local support or understanding. The cycle of inspiration and support had completed itself, transforming from my own struggle for recognition and validation into a platform for encouraging others who faced similar challenges. The family failure had become not just a successful entrepreneur, but a catalyst for broader change in how small communities think about innovation, risk-taking, and the diverse paths that can lead to meaningful achievement. Today, TechFlow employs over 500 people across 6 states, has been recognized as one of the fastest-growing companies in the Midwest, and continues expanding our mission of helping small businesses succeed through innovative technology solutions. More importantly, we've maintained the culture and values that attracted our original team members, creating an environment where people can do their best work while building fulfilling careers. Jessica and Michael recently purchased a larger home to accommodate their growing family, with baby number 2 expected in the spring. Sophia, now 4 years old, has started showing interest in both traditional activities like dance and soccer, and less conventional pursuits like coding games and building robots with her uncle Michael. Most importantly, she's growing up in a family environment that celebrates diverse interests and supports whatever path feels authentic to her developing personality. My parents have become regular attendees at TechFlow company events and enthusiastic promoters of entrepreneurship. Within their social circle, Dad has started volunteering as a mentor for small business owners through the local Economic Development Council, while Mom has joined the board of a nonprofit that provides microloans to women starting their own companies. Their transformation, from skeptics to advocates, reflects the broader change that can occur when people are willing to reconsider their assumptions and learn from experiences that challenge their preconceptions. The most profound change, however, has been in how our extended family thinks about success, ambition, and the importance of supporting each other's authentic goals. Instead of pressuring young family members to conform to traditional expectations, we now ask questions about their interests and passions, offer resources and connections that might help them explore different possibilities, and trust that people are capable of making good decisions about their own lives when given appropriate support and encouragement. Looking back on that devastating moment at Jessica's baby shower when she introduced me as the family failure who would never amount to anything, I realize it was actually the beginning of the most important transformation in our family's history. Her public error forced all of us to confront our assumptions and biases, opening the door to genuine understanding and mutual respect that has enriched all our lives. Sometimes the most painful moments become the catalysts for the most meaningful growth, both individually and within families. The key is maintaining the courage to pursue your authentic path while remaining open to the possibility that relationships can evolve, people can change, and love can ultimately transcend misunderstanding when it's coupled with genuine effort and good faith. My story proves that the only permission you need to build something extraordinary is the permission you give yourself, and that true success is measured not by external validation, but by the positive impact you create for others while staying true to your own values and vision. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.